most people. But, it would be good to start by telling you, POPI is Pakistan Association of Women Editors and Publishers, or Publishers and Editors. So this is an association we founded in 2022 in Lahore, and Madeline was sharing with us how the idea started much earlier. So Madeline, maybe you can talk about that, how the seed was sown of this organization. And besides that, you are an academic, a professor at the Teesside University. And Teesside University has been supporting this project of the archives right through. They funded it, and through Madeline, one of their academics, they were able to give us all the facilities possible to take out the handbook and to run the project itself. So could you tell us, why was it important for Teesside University to be a part of this archival enterprise?
Yes. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, okay. So a little bit louder. Is that better? Okay. So yes, we're here today to, I guess, do two things, or more than two things. We want to talk about a particular project that has come out of a collaboration between my university, Teesside University in the UK, and the Pakistan Association of Women Publishers and Editors, which, as Niilofur mentioned, has been founded through, well, there's a story and I'll tell it, but through collaboration between my university and some women publishers and editors in Pakistan. So one aim is that we want to tell you about our digital handbook that is also available in print form, and there's some copies on that table over there that are free to take, but please take them if you think you really need them and use them wisely, because we've taken great effort to produce these and we want them to be precious to people if possible. So we're going to be talking about this digital handbook and print edition, which documents a project that we've been working on archiving women-edited magazines, and particularly with an art and literary focus. And that's why we have Veera and Tazeen here with us today, because they'll be sharing insights into their work in archiving some magazines, including She and Nukta Art. And the other aim today is just to impress upon you, as best we can, the importance and value of archiving material, which is not to suggest that this is not something that you're invested in yourselves. I'm sure there are many people in this room who are invested in these kind of activities, but it's very close to our heart and our passions, and so that's what we're going to do today. A little bit, I know we don't have a lot of time, about the Editing Women in the Archives project and where that came from. So this project began in the spring of 2024 when two researchers in Lahore and two in Karachi went out to find at-risk magazine publications that had been edited by women from previous decades, that we felt that if these were not digitized and made accessible to people for posterity, that they would be potentially lost to history. So the project began then in 2024, and it's resulted in this handbook that we produced, which contains not only some insights into the material that the researchers did work on, including She, Paper Magazine, Nukta Art, and publications from the Simorg Women's Research and Publication Centre in Lahore. It also contains reflections on the process of trying to do that and the hurdles that they encountered, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that today. The project itself is a POPI project. POPI was founded in 2022 out of a workshop that Niilofur and I and Maniza participated in, along with a number of other women writers and publishers and editors from Pakistan, where we looked at challenges that they were facing to sustaining independent publishing in today's climate. And that itself should, the last tribute I should pay is to two young researchers in IIU in Islamabad who participated in a workshop that my university ran in collaboration with the English department there in 2019-2020. Maniza, did you also participate?
Pardon me?
Did you also participate in that? I can't remember. It was called Women Writing Pakistan. I'm not sure. Yes. So we have a history. As part of that workshop, we supported early career researchers who were wanting to develop their writing on women's writing from South Asia. And two young women researchers came forward to be mentored on a project where they interviewed publishers, women publishers and editors of magazines in Pakistan that were literary magazines, and wanted to investigate why so often those publications did not sustain, maybe lasted for a few years, were passion projects that ultimately didn't continue for all sorts of reasons. So that interest in the sustainability of women's publishing and editing led to the workshop, that led to the foundation of Porpy, that led to the foundation of an organisation that was concerned with mentoring and also with archiving, so that there would be a record of women's work in this field for us to draw on in future, and in order to understand that rich history. So I hope I've said enough, and I'll let someone else speak now.
I think we can start with the researchers, Madeline. We can maybe ask them about the publications that they researched and how they looked at the archives. Would you like?
Yes. So we have a question for Veera, who was particularly working on She magazine. So Veera, what was it like starting work on archiving a magazine like She? Can you tell us about the experience of researching that publication and with that aim of digitizing it?
Yeah. Sure. So I just want to clarify that I'm not a part of Poppy. I was hired for this project by Niilofur and Madeline. So She and Nukta were the two choices. And because I have an art background, both my degrees are in fine arts, so I chose She because my life is oversaturated with art and reading and writing about art. So I wanted to choose She also because I knew that She was no longer functioning as a magazine, and I would get to see it as a historical magazine. And I think in this Q&A, there will be a lot of conversation about generational women, especially with She, because She started in the 1960s by a woman called Zora Qureshi or Zora Karim. And she studied at LSE, she studied political science, and that becomes quite interesting because She is a very political magazine, actually, as you continue to read the issues from the 1960s all the way to 2020. So it shut just around COVID. And when I started looking at She to analyze it and archive it, and when I mean archive it, I really mean digitally scanning it and writing an analysis of it. And I created a vast database which organizes all the data. So we have around 102 issues of She magazine digitized. And I was really lucky because I was reading and discovering She while interviewing the women who were part of writing and making She. Zora Karim, the founder and editor, she passed away before I started this project, so I didn't have access to her, but I had access to all the women who were working with her. And it was interesting that I wasn't obviously familiar with the 1960s, 70s, or 80s, or even 90s issues of She, but when I was talking to the women who were writing and editing and putting together She, because you have to remember that this is pre-digital publication era. So putting together a publication was extremely manual and extremely physical. And the art director for She in the 80s, because most of the issues I had access to and most of the work, most of the magazine I got to analyze were from the 1980s era, and that's because the women who were involved in making She from the 1980s are all very close friends, and one contact just naturally led to the other. So, during the 80s, Nahid Yahya, she actually taught me design at the Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture, and I had no idea that one of her first jobs when she moved back from America was designing and laying She. And She in the 80s was, it was modeled on a very famous American magazine that came out in the 70s called Ms., M.S., and I don't know if any of you have seen that, but it had a very iconic Superwoman cover. It had an animation of Wonder Woman on Ms. magazine. So Ms. was the model for the 1980s She. And it was really interesting when I would speak to Pommy from the fashion, who directed the fashion, and Nahid, who directed the art, how physical and how visual She is. Everything from the type, from the font to the layout, everything is being hand cut, laid on butter paper, done with tweezers. They had to look through a microscope to make sure all the edges were, layered. So I think in the beginning, it was really about learning about the making of She, which was a very tangible process. So content and reading, of course, as you can see from some of the images coming up, were really interesting because you would think that in the 80s, because that was General Zia-ul-Haq's time, you would think that 80s would mean that women are very stifled in Pakistan. But actually, if you go through the 80s archive, you can see that each issue has a dedicated section outlining stoning of women, any kind of physical violence against women. Every issue has something about birth control, sex, abortion, so they were really pushing boundaries in terms of the kind of content they could print. But I think it's because, it came packaged in this really beautiful cover of this very attractive, aspirational woman, and they could really print what we would call sort of provocative articles today. So I think both visually and content-wise, they managed to push a lot of boundaries in the making of She.
That's always interesting, how a magazine sustains itself, and it kind of speaks to the people of the time. I think without it, obviously, it can, sort of become irrelevant. But how many issues did you go through? I'd like to ask that. And at least you had the access to the visual of the issues, because some of them were from the LSE library.
Yeah.
But my question to you is, visually, when you look at the entire, from the 60s to 2000 plus, how did it change you as a young researcher, young artist, young woman, who found a lot of relevant material in it? How did you respond to it?
Yeah.
How did you see it change? How did it become, let us say, true to the times, or did it kind of become fluff?
Yeah, I mean, there's a short answer and a long answer to that.
Take a medium-sized answer.
The medium size is that obviously She became very commercial towards mid and early 2000s. And it's interesting because in the 70s and in the 60s, She would be printed on newsprint, like A3 size newsprint. There are images on the back. And people were thirsty for information. This is the pre-internet era. So She almost took this role for both women and men in the 60s, 70s, and 80s for disseminating information, not just on women, but she actually had a She-Man section because there were so many men reading it. So in the first 3 decades of She, it is a very aspirational magazine which is packed of info. And towards the 90s and 2000s, She becomes very advertisement heavy and mainly becomes known for art reviews, actually, and for Marjorie Hussain's art column that she would do every issue. But it's not to say that even though She sustained itself through all these decades, it's not to say that Zohra Karim didn't struggle printing and publicizing and publishing She, because in the 70s, during the Bangladesh war, newsprint was rationed. So there's a dedicated section called Pats and Pans, which was like a feedback column where people would write back to She and giving them their notes. And there's a critique given by a reader saying, why is She becoming thinner and thinner and thinner? This is in the 70s. And Zohra Karim writes back in the next bi-weekly issue saying, because we're going through war and there's no newsprint to print on. So, and then in the 80s, they would have like special 25, 15-year anniversaries, and that would be very retrospective. So even, the size and the physical nature of She changes, glossy, matte, black and white. You're talking about 6 decades. So there were a lot of physical and content changes. Yeah.
So in a way, it catalogs also the design and print history of the last, 7, 8, almost like 80 years, I would say. Not 80,
Yeah.
but 60 years. 60 years, yeah.
And some really interesting cliches that 80s you would think big hair, big shoulder pads. Yeah, that does come through in the font, in the layout, in the blown up images. So yeah, it's there.
I think that leads on to a question for Tazeen, who was working on the Nuqta art, which was a much more recent publication. But what was the difference maybe between what Veera was doing and what you were doing when it came to archiving an art-focused magazine like Nuqta Art? Can you tell us a little bit about the experience of researching that?
Okay. So Nuqta was specifically an art-based magazine, and it was a Karachi-based magazine. And interestingly enough, it was the founders were 4 women. And so when I started researching Nuqta Art, my first thought was that I'm going to find a lot of feminist thought in there, a lot of feminism in there, women-focused articles and about how women were responding to art and all of that. And once I started looking at Nuqta, I realized that while it covered art in a very multidisciplinary and a very wide way, I didn't see much of feminism, of feminist ways of thinking, or let's say tangible feminist ways of thinking reflected in there. We had a focus on exclusion and inclusion. So we had a focus on periphery and non-periphery. We also had a focus on bringing in the diaspora. So I guess in the larger context, when we think about what feminism stands for, we have all of this reflected in Nuqta, but we don't see a focus only on women artists, leading to the marginalization of the male artists. So that was a big, discovery for me. However, as I started looking at the magazine, so let me just say that I'm a design teacher, and so publication design, or what we see as the design of a magazine, is something that is very dear to me. And as a young student, as a young teacher, Nuqta Art was one of the magazines that I had picked up because it had visually called out to me at Liberty, which is where we found Nuqta Art. And bringing that copy home, I remember going through that copy, looking at the beautiful visuals, the beautiful design, lovely spreads, typography, color, quality printing, all of that calling out to the designer in me. And I remember taking that to my classes and showing it to my students, that here is a magazine that is very much like an international art magazine, and look at how Pakistan has evolved and how design is playing a role in art. That said, when I started looking at Nukta, what I realized was that it was not just a magazine which was just composed of art and exhibition reviews. It had features and critical features about Pakistani artists as well as international artists. So, as a design teacher and as an art teacher, a lot of times we encounter art history and design history as being focused on the West. There is very little that we know about our own artists or our own designers. Nukta offered me all of that. So, looking at reprints of Chughtai's old writings about his own art, Miriam Habib's article and art writing from the 1930s, reprinted in English, commissioned and reprinted in Nukta art. We see a conversation about Chughtai's work between Sangeeta Thapa and his son. And those emails actually tell you so much about the lack of discourse between artists across borders. The Pakistani artists not really having much conversation with the artists in other parts of South Asia. So that in itself was beautiful. Then looking critically at the work of Musarrat Mirza, Meher, Nahid Afroz, fantastic articles which talk about how these women and these Shahid Sajjad, Rashid Arayan's work published in here. So it was like a fascinating deep dive into what Pakistani art was doing at that time. But that wasn't all. The one section that really called out to me was the Nukta at Art section. Now, Nukta at Art section is actually a beautiful archive which only lasted 5 to 6 issues of art happenings across Pakistan and Karachi. It reveals so much more about, so much more beyond the gallery, the paintings inside the gallery, because art publications mostly offer us reviews of what is happening in the art galleries. They do not tell us about all the other happenings that are happening alongside those. So art symposiums, art critical discourses, funding, art prizes, small gatherings that people themselves put together around art. A professor who's looking at Chitrali and Hunza, art and talking to children and doing a collaborative, beautiful work with them. Ecologies of art. So all of these things come out in that news section of art called Nukta at Art. And this is what I call, it gives us a glance or a glimpse into the ecology of art. This is what I call it, the ecology of art scene of Karachi from 2005 to 2015.
Thank you, Tazeen. And I must tell the audience that the wonderful designer of Nukta is here.
Yes.
And her work will always be remembered as the breakthrough at that time. But now I would like to sort of then address the next question to Maniza. Maniza, as living in Pakistan, and how do you think Little Book Company can play a role in that, in kind of increasing the scope of archiving?
The Little Book Company that Niilofur mentioned, which I'm a founder of, is actually an e-book company, an e-book publishing company. It's Pakistan's first e-book company. And it's based in Pakistan. And the team that's put it together, the technical team, is based out of Nazimabad. And so it's very much a Pakistani company. I'm the only one that's sitting in New York. When we got started, the whole idea was that we would create e-books and that we would publish new fiction, new non-fiction as e-books, but that we would bring into the e-book space books that were out of print. And the whole reason for this, I mean, I'm a writer, an author, I saved a bookshop, so the idea that I would now suddenly go for e-books sounded absurd because a book should be held in your hands to read. But the time in 2020 was such that there was a need that there was a problem I was trying to solve, which was paper was becoming more and more expensive for publishers. And just between the fact that paper was so expensive and the cost of books and magazines was going up so much, and that book shops were closing down, there were so few, it seemed like an e-book was the right solution to answer a problem. So we have that. When I look at archiving, I find that the Little Book Company has on it now books that are working like, the Little Book Company is working like an archival space, because it has managed to preserve magazines and books that are out of print now. For example, the first set of books we converted into e-books were all of Scheherazade Publishing's books, Asif Farrukhi's books. So they came as our first set of e-books. With that came his literary magazine, Dunyazad. Then we brought in Aaj, City Press's books. But our first publisher who brought us her books that were out of print was Maktab-e Danial's Huri Nurani, and was a journalist-owned magazine and almost entirely run by women journalists, except for Zahid Hussain and Muhammad Hanif. And all of these people owe everything. They say it themselves, that to Razia Bhatti, who was amazing. And the Little Book Company has, in a way, also archived Razia Bhatti, because we have a Little Book Company podcast that has all of these wonderful journalists talk about her, talk about the Newsline journey. When I think of archiving, well, I think that writing itself, the act of writing, the act of nonfiction and fiction, is in its entirety looking back and remembering and preserving and documenting and recording forever for everybody. And so archiving is not a process of, it almost sounds like, well, you do something and you put it away and maybe somebody will use it. But everything we do every second is actually archived, whether it is in our brains or whether we put it into a book. I just think it's fascinating what Veera and Tazeen have done, because the one thing that it teaches us, and I hope that's one of the messages that we're sending out today, is look around you at the magazines and the books you have at home, the things you hold on to, even the conversations you're having with your elders. It will all go away. It will all disappear unless you do something to save it, because this is our own history. And if you look at the magazines that Pakistan has produced, She, Nukta, the progressive socialist magazines in Urdu that were published in the 1970s, which we also have on the Little Book Company, the covers alone give you the entire history, not only of Pakistan, but of the world. The covers show you Vietnam. They show you what happened in Palestine. They show you what happened in Africa, with the assassinations of the progressive leaders of the time. It's an amazing thing, just in the covers. And so the production of magazines and then the archiving process, I think, is one of the most heroic things we can do for the history of this country and for the world, really. So it goes beyond women. It goes to feminism. The idea of what it means to be a feminist, which means that you look at creating a balance. You think about preserving humanity. That is being feminist. So it's not just women. It's not just being feminine. It's something larger than that. And so really amazing work that you have done.
Thank you, Maniza. And it's so valuable to be reminded how work that is in print it's an act of archiving in itself, and that's something that throughout this project I've really been awakened to, I guess, in my own research and writing work, and the way that I think about so many things is to understand that a book in itself is an archive. And then if we have a magazine that reminds us of all those books that have been published, or reviews those books, or reviews that work and documents it, that itself is an archive. So I have a sort of hall of mirrors in my mind, or a palimpsest, or I don't know quite what the metaphor is, but so much is contained in so much, isn't it? And if we can do a little bit of that through a project like this, and by the way, the material that we've worked on, we're going to have a website that hosts at least samples of that material, and the researcher's insight into sort of curating that sample, in addition to some fuller copies of the material we've archived. And then we're looking at future partners to make more of that more accessible. So it is a bit of a slow process. There are certain things we need to consider along the way, but we are working on that, so bear with us. And I must just mention that there are 3 people who we haven't mentioned yet in this conversation who must be mentioned, and they are the 3 who are based in Lahore working on the other part of this project. Merish Amin of the Aleph Review, who, if you have a copy of this in your hands, has been so very responsible for getting this printed on that precious paper that it is printed. It's free to take, but please, like I say, use it. Take it and be fond and careful with it, I guess. And in addition to that, Manur Jalal, who worked on Paper Magazine, and Hira Asmat, who worked on the Simorg publications. And then, of course, we need to thank all those people who've made those publications accessible as well. I won't list them, they are in the handbook, but they should be acknowledged. Do we have time for maybe one more question for... Yes, okay. So just 2 short questions to ensure that Veera and Tazeen have that space to talk as much as they can about the work that they've done. Veera, what was the most fascinating thing that you discovered through your work on archiving She? Is there one thing you can pin it down to?
No, there is not one thing. But, I mean, I have spoken about how it was so interesting to discover the manual work that went into making She, design-wise, layout-wise. But actually, something that was really interesting for me to discover when I was interviewing the women who made She was how business savvy and almost, I don't know, the way that Zohra Karim was described to me by the women who worked with her, they were always in awe of how she just managed to get the right type of manipulation done by sponsors to get the magazine done every month. And one really interesting anecdote was, so the correspondents in Lahore were mainly Maniza Hashmi and Naila Daud. And Naila Daud told me that when she would handwrite all of her articles for She, then her husband's secretary would type it. Then they would send it to Maniza Hashmi, who would give it to PIA's assistant, who would then, so all the articles from Lahore were flying on PIA because Zohra Karim's ex-husband used to have a really high position at PIA. So it was really interesting to see that, these kind of, what you're saying, Maniza, of course, the written content, the layout, our analysis, yeah, that is a way of archiving, but I think also, the backstory of the women who made She, the things that they have to say about their working dynamics, they're all very, very good friends, and it must have been really interesting being in that office. If you think about it, a lot of very opinionated, very, aspirational, driven women. That's probably a high energy area, and I think that was really fascinating to learn and read about She and to be in conversation in tandem with the women who, one of them has just walked in half an hour late, but she has the whole archive, which is Nahid Yahya. So she has the full 80s archive because she made every magazine with her hands from 1983 to 1989. So that was probably the most interesting thing, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, it's all really fascinating. Do we have time for one more question for Tazeen? Yes? Yeah. So this is a slightly different question, but for what the researchers were doing was not only conducting the research, as I say, but reflecting on the process of it and what goes into the making of an archive, which is not completely neutral, of course. So Tazeen, you were particularly conscious of how our biases can impact what we select for and what we showcase in the archives, what we seek for, I should say, and what we showcase in the archives. So can you reflect on what you are thinking about that, particularly in relation to working on Nuqta art? Because I know you have very particular things you wanted to say in the handbook that were pertinent to that.
Yeah. So again, going back to my my life as a teacher and as an academic, I'm particularly conscious of what is offered to us and what we can then offer to our students. Archive being a learning space as well, right? So, and we speak extensively about how archives and showcases about countries are often flavored with a lot of nationalistic, often propagandist over flavors, right? And so when I became that researcher who was now going to curate an identity or a space for what students or other people would be accessing to know about art and its history from 2005 to 2015, which is the duration of Nuqta's publication years, active years, I was particularly conscious of that. So what did I really do? I think Niilofur and I had a conversation about what is it that we really wanted to showcase. And two things that came out were how Nuqta, in fact, the one main thing that came out was how Nuqta changed the perception around art in Pakistan. So keeping that as our main idea, all the articles that were centered, or all the little bits in there which was centered around that central idea, was what I decided to archive. Because as a designer, as an person from the art fraternity, the whole of Nuqta, I was greedy about it. Let's archive this whole thing. But we didn't have that kind of space, we didn't have that kind of funds, so we couldn't really do that, right? So how do you do that? So it was this central thing, the perception change, and therefore, I started looking at all the articles that followed and revolved around the theme of changing perceptions. The second thing that I looked at was then talking to the readers of Nuqta. And a lot of things that I hadn't really thought about, I discovered by interviewing the readers. Who were these readers? Artists themselves, art teachers, not just from the art and design elite institutions, but teachers of art in schools. KJS, CS, Nuqta has a life in their art studios, you know. So children as young as 14 and 13 look through those magazines. Art teachers prescribe Nuqta to them when they have to do their art portfolios for A-levels. And so speaking to them, speaking to those people, those students of art who are not from Indus Valley and Habib, who can't afford a 500 and 700 rupee publication. So Karachi School of Arts, visual studies. It was beautiful to know that some of the students who were now artists themselves spoke about how they used to visit VM Art Gallery and Nuqta's copies used to be there, and they would actually pool money to buy a 500 rupee copy of Nuqta and then circulate it amongst themselves. But what were they really reading, you know? So it wasn't just the main artists, right? They said the beautiful critical reviews written in Nuqta about contemporary art, because they said when we are taught by our teachers, most of it is historical, art history, Pakistani older artists, but contemporary art is never really showcased. Nuqta offered that window into the contemporary art scene, which is where they became inspired, and today Pakistan's art has evolved a lot from there. So it was a fascinating journey. I also, after speaking to them, decided to archive the book reviews about art, because they said we didn't really know पाकिस्तानी आर्ट के ऊपर कौन सी किताबें होती हैं, लेकिन नुक्ता के अंदर क्योंकि रिव्यू छपता था इसलिए हमें पता होता था कि ये आई है, लिबर्टी पे है या कहाँ है, या हम अपनी लाइब्रेरीज में जाके फिर उन किताबों को देख रहे होते थे. वी वुड टेल द स्कूल और द इंस्टीट्यूशन गेट दिस बुक अबाउट आर्ट. सो नुक्ता actually offers so much more, and this is how, going away from my own biases of those beautiful spreads only, you know, the main 6-page articles, I actually went into looking at the book reviews, the smaller, not so glamorous parts of Nukta, and I decided to include that into the archive as well.
Thank you. So I think we've maybe got time for a few questions now. Just before I do, just to say there are some little postcards over there, or unless everyone's taken them, and on them they have a space if you want to share your own archival story with us. So please do consider doing that. Can you hear me? Yeah. And they're at the back. Okay, so Niilofur, do you want to choose the...
I think Aqila's hand went up, and then Alexander Kesser's, and then I see Imran Sherwani at the back. I know most of these people, it seems. Okay, Aqila, why don't you go ahead? Mic de dijiye zara inko. Mic de de. He's just bringing a mic to you. Just introduce yourself, and then we can have it.
Ji, shukriya. It pays to know the moderators. Yeah. And two questions actually. One for Veera. Why do you think she closed down? Is it only because of commercial reasons, or is it because there was a lot more censorship during the Zia era? That's one question. And for Maniza, why are you bemoaning the loss of paper bags? Every time you print an e-book, you're saving a tree. Remember, that is your contribution to the Earth's ecology and to saving the planet. So I think more e-books are required rather than paperback books. I know it's not very popular to say that, but that's how I look at it.
So I think we can get the answer from...
Sure. She didn't close in the 80s. She closed in 2020, just during COVID. No, I don't think at all it had much to... she's closing had much to do with censorship, and I don't think she really struggled during the 80s because of Zia-ul Haq. I think she closed because Zora Karim died. She was the backbone of She, and as long as she was alive, she ran She. And, employees came and went, but, Zora Karim stayed. And once she passed away, I mean, it's quite similar to a lot of family businesses. You can't expect your children to have the same passion that you have. So, she is really, even though it meant so much for so many readers, it is also 50% of She really existed primarily because of Zora Karim. Without her, nothing would have happened. So, yeah.
So just to thank you, Aqila, for that, pointing that out, that an e-book does indeed save a tree. But again, coming back to the fact that paper is so expensive, if you look at the 3 major magazines that we used to buy on the street, Newsline, Herald, and She, they all closed in 2019, around about the same time. And primarily because of the cost of paper, and obviously also because the people that were holding it together, that were the founders, they were either running out of steam or had passed away in the case of She. But really the economic reason underneath that, more than the political reason, is the cost of paper. It was just too much. And then just to elevate what Tazeen said, these magazines, when archived, they cut through the dominant narrative, whether it is within the state or from other states. about who we are, what we were, how we got here. And these magazines documented all that from very different angles, from the artistic angle, from music, art, books, from social, economic, political points of view, in very subversive and not so subversive ways, and amazing.
I just wanted to thank all of you. This is fabulous presence. I've had a fairly long career, 45 years. She gave me my first break. Nukta, she gave me my first break with my architecture interior design. Nukta gave me my first break with art. The Biennale, Karachi, Lahore gave me my first break in the art. The bulk of journalists that have written about the work I've done and the many facets of work that I attempt have been women. The question is, why? Why is it the women who have encouraged the men? So.
We are the caring ones, that's why. The Imran at the back, and that's the last question, because we really have to wrap up. There's a session after that. Yeah.
I'm really glad that Maniza Sahiba mentioned Newsline and Herald was mentioned, and it was mentioned that She magazine actually didn't have to struggle during General Zia's days. And I was seriously wondering, and that's why my question is to, not to the panelists, but to Niilofur, you, why couldn't we have somebody from those two magazines sitting here? We have Rihanna sitting here. We never mentioned Rihanna. We did mention Razia, but not Saira Irshad, not Amber Khairi, not those ladies who actually were the inspiration for all journalists, young journalists of that era, like when I was young, at that time I was young. So we're not talking about them. And they actually did a remarkable work as journalists, not just as women journalists, as journalists.
Imran, I
Very
totally
powerful,
agree with
very
you,
bold.
but let me answer that question because you've addressed it to me. When we chose the magazines the archive of which was threatened, we chose, one was She. It was the longest running magazine, general interest magazine and a women magazine combined. And actually its archives were really threatened because after Zohra Karim's death, the office was closed, everything was dispersed. And we wanted to very quickly retrieve it and try and document it. With Nukta, the same. A lot of our material was lost in somebody's basement. Copies and copies were destroyed. Only Romana, myself, Sabia and Amra have a few left now. So, and we wanted also to move away from, Newsline. We maybe in future will look at it. Because you see, we are not forgetting the many, many women editors and publishers. No, that is not. This is the beginning. And we must start somewhere. And we also wanted to keep it diverse. We wanted an art magazine because, that was something that had an impact at that time. So this is the question. But remember, each project in our country is not the end or should not be the end. It should inspire people. I mean, we have a large audience here. It should inspire the institutions, educational institutions, the individuals to hold on to their archives, to do something, document them, because it has to be a collective effort. A lot of our projects lack depth because we don't have documentation. And maybe collectively we can work towards it. Like Nahid Yahya had kept all those archives, so we were able to, get information. So I think this is something we should be aware of. And last word from Madeline, and we really have to wrap up.
Maniza wanted to say something. But I would
We
also
actually
say-
are spilling over into the next session. We can't do that, Maniza. We have to wrap up. Sorry
Well,
about
maybe
that.
people can join us
Yeah.
for
Yeah, we
any
can.
Gushen afterwards.
Yeah,
Sorry.
while you pick up some of the handbooks, we can have
So
it.
thank you
Thank
to
you very
everyone,
much.
and thank you to everyone who's contributed to the project.